That's funny. Yep, there you go. Now it's recording.
Awesome. Cool. So without further ado, let's hop into a few examples as to how to better visualize, or in a more interesting way, visualize your data within Tableau. So the first thing we're going to discuss today is how to make a waterfall chart. And so what really is a waterfall chart? It's a visualization that helps you understand how positive and negative values of dimensional members, so let's say subcategories, it shows you how those are contributing to a total. So what makes these different from a simple running total calculation is that they illustrate how each dimension member with a positive value adds to a running total, and each dimension member with a negative value detracts from that running total. So the first thing I want to visualize is my profit. So I'm going to drag that onto the view, and I'm going to break this down by subcategory. Great. So pretty simple stuff here. I'm going to add in the running total, just like the little explanation hinted that I do. So right now we're seeing this isn't really over time, so it's not a running total like per month or anything like that. It's just showing you how each one adds or subtracts a little bit from that running total, right? So these ones that are on the up and up, this one decreased a little bit. So how do we want to show that in a really impactful way? So I mean, you can tell right from this graph that there are differences, but there's certainly a better way to do this, which is the waterfall chart. So what I like to do is just entire view this. We get a nice holistic view here. I'm going to change this to a Gantt bar. So instead of the bars, so instead of if I put like profit onto size here, it would size the bars as such. If I change it to Gantt and I put something on the size, it's going to go up or down. And that's exactly kind of the next step here, is for me to put profit onto size. And so this is almost right. Tableau isn't broken in this sense. It's doing exactly what we asked it to do. But basically, the profit of just over 40,000 for accessories, it's starting at the top of the profit. So it's starting at around 40,000 and then going up until we hit the number that we started with. Same with each one of these. So basically, it's backwards. So all we really have to do to fix this is change the direction of this. So how can you do that? There's a few different ways, but a really simple way to do that is to edit this in shelf. So if you right-click on any of these, you always have the ability to edit in shelf, like such. If you also right-click or just double-click, you also have that same capability. So in this case, I'm just going to add a negative sign. It's going to basically flip-flop the way these, the direction with which these are going, right? So now 40,000 started at the 40,000 total, but it just went down. So now this works in the way that we wanted it to work, but we need to showcase that some of these were decreasing while others were increasing. So we can put just regular profit onto color. We can have the nice scale if that's what you want, or we can go to the color scale, click on stepped colors, and make this act in a more dimensional way as opposed to a measure, giving us a range. So if we have just 2 steps, it's almost as if we have just 2 categories, even though we're still operating in a continuous way. So now if we drag profit to label again, it's pretty easy to see that this one was negative. You can even change these colors. Red is a little dark here, but maybe this orangish. I'm a little colorblind, so can't really tell, but I think that's about right. Yep, just something that pops out a little bit more. Additionally, you can just write a calculation that says, if profitable, then 1. If not, give me the other one. Mike, it looks like we have a question. I'm not sure if you saw that, but it was basically a cry for help.
It must have come directly to you.
Hey, Sheila, what are you experiencing?
Oh,
Okay.
in regards to the audio, yeah, I would recommend if anybody's having any audio issues to reconnect, as it appears Dan's audio is connected successfully. So if anybody can't hear, I would just disconnect and reconnect, and hopefully that'll work.
Okay, cool. So as I was saying, you can color these different bars in a lot of different ways. So right now I'm doing it still with a continuous pill. I'm just making it act like a dimension by just having two available options. I can also just write a Boolean calculation that says profitable. In this case, all we have to do is say sum of profit more than 0, and that's it. Because if it is, it's going to give me one thing. If it's not, it's going to give me another thing. There's just two available options. And so I can do the same thing, drag that profitable pill onto color, same exact thing, right? And if I wanted to specify even further and give these actual names instead of just true false, which is the default Boolean return, I can say if this is more than above, else below, end, right? So you can customize even further. So there's always a few different ways to do one thing within Tableau. And what if we want to break this down and partition this by category, let's say? Right now we're working with subcategories. So that's as easy as just dragging category to the column shelf. But as you can see, it's computing in the exact same way. We just added in barriers between the two. So right now we just know which ones are a part of which category. And if that's what you want, fair enough. But what if you want to compute the running total per category, per partition, we say, in Tableau? So what we have to do here is change the way the running total has been calculated. And you can do that by coming over here to compute using. So typically, it's table across. So basically saying from left to right and everything in between. So disregard all the partitions, or the panes rather. Let's call them that. In order to get it to compute per category, we have to say pane across, then down, because it's computing per the data within these little gray boxes. So if we do that, it basically restarts for each category. And if we wanted to add in a total for each one, we can always come down here to analysis, totals, and add all subtotals. Right, so we see the actual totals. If I just put profit back on color, the totals actually turn into this gray if it's a continuous measure on here. So any questions related to waterfall charts, just throw them in the chat box. We'll also have some time at the end of this, so you can always save your questions till then. But next on the list is, let's see, a Pareto chart. So these ones are actually really, really cool. And it's because it's kind of this phenomenon that happens across industries where typically 20% of dimension, let's say it can be customers or products manufactured, anything really, tends to make up about 80% of your profit. So it's a type of chart that contains both bars and a line graph, where the individual values are represented in descending order by bars, and the cumulative total is represented by the line itself. So we're going to go through one of these, and this is a little bit complicated, so again, feel free to ask any questions. But basically, we're going to compare our customers and the profit and see if 20% of the customers make up 80% of the profit. So first thing we have to do here, drag out profit and customers. And we're going to want to sort this descending, like the explanation noted. And so right now, this is a lot. And this is what Tableau does natively, is it tries to visualize in the best way, but we want to smush this all together. So we can just say entire view as opposed to standard, or fit with. Either one of these would do the same exact thing. All right, so we got all of our customers descending by profit. But we want to see the cumulative total represented by the line. So we can come down here to Quick Table Calc, say running total, edit that same table calculation, add a secondary table calculation that says percent of total. And so I'm going to switch this to a line. And then the next thing we have to do is basically get that other numeric axis as opposed to customer name, which is a dimension. So it's giving us categories. So we'll add customer name onto detail. And we need this to act in a continuous way. So basically we have to aggregate this. So I can always right click on this, turn it into a measure, and we'll say count distinct. We'll do the same exact thing in terms of the table calcs. So we'll say running total, and we'll edit that, tie it to customer name, add the secondary in, percent of total, customer name as well. And now we have basically our Pareto line. So right now we could just look at this and say 20% of my customers make up just about 80% of my profit. So the law here holds up with this particular data set, which is interesting. But we also want to make this visually appealing. So what we can do is add in profit again, change this one to bar chart, and dual axis these. So basically combine our two y-axes into one. A few other little tips and tricks here. If you want the line to appear above the bar charts, you can always flip-flop them here, like so, or you can always right-click on the axis and say move marks to back. And to get rid of one of these axes, we can always unclick show header. And the last piece here to make this really impactful for people viewing this is to add in the constant lines that show the 20% and the 80%. So what was our initial question? Did 20% of the customers? Let's do 20% of the customers. Did they contribute to about 80% of profit? Looks like it. So that, in a nutshell, is a Pareto chart. Alrighty. Next on the list is a sparkline. So sparklines are not especially complex. They're just a very, very visually appealing way to view data over time. So when I create the initial content of the sparkline, it's not going to seem all that spectacular, but it starts to be really cool when you can format it in the correct way. So I'm going to just take my sum of sales. I want to visualize this over time with the level of granularity of months. And so sparkline comes into play when you add something like subcategory onto rows, basically breaking down this aggregation of sales by my subcategories. So giving me, I don't know, 12 to 15 different categories. Right, so this is basically a sparkline. And you can always give this to customers or whoever it is that you're showing Tableau with. But we need to basically just make this look better, really, at the end of the day. So what we can do first is fit the height here, get all of these onto one view. A key thing here is to edit the axes and make sure each one of these categories is operating on their own axis. So right now it's automatic, which means everybody is restricted by the same axis. Basically, it's kind of skewing it, but if we have independent ones, you see a truer version of the sum of sales for each subcategory. Right, it makes sense per subcategory. You're not comparing in that super literal way. So from here, we can also get rid of the headers, condense this a little bit. Now this is starting to look pretty cool, right? We can even change this to quarter, because all you really want to see is where these peaks and troughs were within your sum of sales over time for each subcategory. A few more little formatting, housekeeping things here. We can format, get rid of some of these grid lines. So we'll get rid of the grid lines here for rows, for columns. We'll get rid of these 0 lines as well. Just cleans it up a bit. Then we can add in a cool little indicator that basically says, were they increasing or decreasing at the last point in time that we have, visualized. So the first step here is to create a calculation that says, give me my last point. And then we can write a simple conditional statement here, basically saying, if the last point, which is always 0, if that equals 0, then give me the sum of sales, right? If we click on last, we get that little blurb explaining what last is in this case. So last is 0, 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 etc. But last is always 0 right here. So it returns the number of rows from the current row to the last row in the partition. So by putting last point onto rows again, you see how it gives us that little point here associated with the line for each one. It's calculated right because it's essentially the same exact line, the sum of sales, but just the last one. So we want this to be an indicator, so what we can do is dual axis these, and they're not quite lined up, so what we have to do is synchronize the axes. It's a very, very important thing to do when you're dual axising. So now they operate right next to each other. We'll get rid of this header, make these a little bit bigger. Hide this indicator for all of those times where it wasn't the last. And then we can see that last point. But this only really matters if you can say, was it increasing or decreasing? Because right now it's just a little dot at the end saying this is your last point. Well, that's pretty obvious. Who cares? You need this to actually tell you something. So what we can do is create another calculated field basically saying the sum of sales was more than the sum of sales right before it, then increase. Else decrease. That a little bit better here, increase, decrease. So basically saying, if this sum of sales is more than this one, shown as an increase or a decrease, either one. So calculation 1 onto color. We can see all the times that it increased and these few times where we actually decreased from the previous quarter. Great. So next up on the list is bars within bars. So this is a really, really common one, and I'll show you a simple example, but I recommend taking this bar because it's something that's so simple to do, but it goes a long way in terms of what you can show people with just bar charts. It's a really easy and useful way to use Tableau. So my problem is this. I want to visualize sales with profit, let's say by subcategory. but I want these to be overlaid somehow. I want to just very, very easily see the differences between the two. So again, you can probably see that maybe by flipping the axes a little bit, kind of easy to see. But the first step here is to combine these onto the same axis. So right now we're operating on two separate y-axes. So we can combine these with the dual axis again. And so Tableau is going to, by default, give us these two circles, right? The automatic mark type is a circle. And this is a cool way to visualize. I kind of like the way that Tableau does this because it shows right next to each other. Right? These ones are very close. These ones a little more farther out. But what we want to do here is change this from the automatic circle to the bar. And as you can see here, we're getting somewhere. But if I highlight each one, you know, the profit versus the sales, I can see that they're overlapping, which basically hides a lot of the data. So what we want to do here is, okay, we see that profit is the orange one, sales is the teal one. We want profit to be the smaller one within the teal bar. We can go to the profit, which because we're operating on a dual axis has a separate marks card dedicated to that measure itself. We can actually just decrease the size here until it kind of fits within the sales one. We can increase the sales too, even a little bit. We might want to increase the color here to really make the profit stand out. Maybe make profit something a little bit more jarring, maybe that red. Maybe something like, I don't know, there's a really bright lime green. I don't know. I'm just choosing random things, but basically something that stands out and have the underlying one, something a little bit more in the background. So that's really all there is to with bars within bars. It's just a great way to visualize two measures right next to each other and still have access to all these. So the next thing we're going to talk about is a bump chart. And so let me set the stage by saying a bump chart is essentially just ranking different values within a dimension and seeing how they change over time. So really what you want is, let's say, 4 or 5 different ranks and seeing where something like region or customer name would fit into one of those ranks. So basically it has to take on a rank. It can only be one within 5 different ranks or one within 4, whatever it might be. I'll show you guys what that means by dragging profit onto rows. I want to visualize this over time, so let's say months. Make this full view. And let's say we want to analyze our regions, right? So we can just drag regions to color. And so as we can see here, we're seeing our different regions over time, but there's no true rank. I mean, we can probably deduce that just from looking at this. It looks like Central was the lowest over time compared to, let's say, East was a little bit higher, South kind of in the middle, West, it looks like it had a good march, but we want to see the true rank. So what we can do is use the rank table function, table calculation. So all we have to do here is right click on the sum of profit on the view, come down to quick table calc and say rank. And so this doesn't look as we expect it to look. You know, it doesn't give us the 4 different ranks that each region can assume per month. Instead, it's ranking based on the month itself. So it gives us 12, 13 different options for rank, as opposed to just 4 because we only have 4 regions. So in order to fix this, we have to change the way the table calculation is being computed. So if we come across here to compute using, we can see it defaulted to table across. what we really want is to compute this using the region itself. So we can click on region, and now this is how a bump chart is truly calculated, right? So we can actually show this filter or just, change this to discrete and go through these different ones, the different ranks themselves. And you can see where each region was per month. So it looks like Central had a decent start, pretty low throughout the rest of the year, decent comeback at the end, East, South, West. It's a cool way to just force this to exist within one of these different categories. Cool. So next up on the list is a control chart. So control charts are cool ways to show which values within what you're analyzing are out of your standard deviations. So what we can do here is start off with what this looks like at the end. I'll give a quick example here. I'm just going to Google this real quick to show you guys what this looks like, or I have my actual Tableau Lunchable. Right, so it's a statistical control used to determine in a manufacturing or business process if something is in a state of statistical control. And you have the ability to make this dynamic as well, so you can change the standard deviations with which you want to specify whether or not it's in or out of control. So, first things first, we need to figure out what it is we're analyzing. So, sum of sales, and let's say over time, I'm going to analyze this by months, right? So it defaults to line. Let's change this to entire view. And what we want to see is circles. So it's easy to see if it's above an upper or lower bound. Next is to create a parameter, basically saying, how many standard deviations do I want to analyze this using? So we're going to call this standard deviations, and we will actually keep it as a float. We'll say the current value is 0. Give me a range from 0 to 1 with a step size of 0.1, right? So we can flick through 10 different values and see which months are in or out of statistical control. So think of a parameter as basically a dynamic variable, a variable just like any of these that you can change on the spot. And so as we click through this, nothing happens because this parameter is not tied to anything. So what we need to do is create that upper and lower bound and then create a calculation that says if any of these are above that, give it one color. If not, give it another color. So we need to create the upper and lower bound. So we'll start with the upper bound. And we'll say the window average, the sum of sales, so basically the average using the data on the view itself, plus the window standard deviation of that same aggregation, sum of sales, times the standard deviations. Right, so we'll wrap these together like so, and that's going to give us the upper bound for our control analysis. So we'll just drag down a detail. I'm going to duplicate this field. I'll rename it to lower bound. And all we have to do to create the lower bound is to edit this, and instead of saying plus, say minus. And so we'll throw that one on detail as well. And from here, we can just drag out a reference band on the whole table. It's saying from the lower bound to the upper bound. So as you can see, as I go through each one, I'm increasing the control range. We'll get rid of this guy because just don't really like how that looks. Get rid of the labels here so we can go from computation to null. And the last thing we need to do is show these few out of statistical control to be a different color than these ones inside. And so again, that's a simple Boolean in Tableau. So we can create that and say, I guess, outliers. So if the sum of sales is higher than the upper bound, or if the sum of sales is lower than lower bound, give me two different values. Just because this is a Boolean, that's all there is to give. Only two things, true or false. And if we add that to color, we can see how these ones were not higher or lower than the bounds themselves, so they're false. These ones were, so they're true. And again, this dynamically updates as you change your parameter. Cool. So that is a really cool one. And again, if anyone has any questions, just throw them in the chat box. But the next one we're going to touch on, and this will be the final one we go through, and then we can talk about anything really if anyone has any questions. But we're going to talk about how to use some of these in a dashboard and how to select between different sheets on a dashboard themselves using a parameter, just like we used here. We used a parameter for changing this variable so it can be more dynamic. We're going to do the same thing on a dashboard. So let's say I have my sales per state. And we'll call this guy map. Then we have a time series, so maybe profit over time with a month granularity level. And we have a scatter plot, sales and profit with all my customers. And we've got discounts or something on color. If we have the three of these on a dashboard, right now I have no way to show only the time series or only the map at one time. You know, if I use these as a filter, both of these update. What if I just want to see time series or just see map? So in order to do that, I need to go back to one of these worksheets and create a parameter that says, give me map or give me time series. So first step is to come over here to say, create parameter. We'll say choose sheet. We're going to change the data type from a float to a string. We'll just do a list manually, and we'll call one map. We'll call one time. We'll show that parameter control. And again, a parameter tied to nothing does nothing. So we've got choose sheet, map, time. That's how we want it to look. But of course, it does nothing. It only does something when it's tied to a calculated field. So we'll call this calculated field the chosen sheet. And all we have to do in this case is say, bring that parameter onto choose sheet. The key thing here was that the parameter was set to map originally. And that's what we want because this is the map, obviously. So tying these two together is really key. When I add chosen sheet onto the filters card, because I've tied these together, I only see map. Let's do the same thing for time series. We have it as map. I'll show you guys what happens when I add chosen sheet to filters card when it's not set. It only has map. So I need to change that. I need to change that to the time value. So I'll say chosen sheet now to filters card, and now we set this one to time. And what happens here now on the dashboard is if I add this parameter into the equation, choose sheet, I can basically toggle between the two of these. But let's take this one step further. We don't want this blank space to just be there when I don't want to see that. There's no real point there. I might as well just have both. So what I have to do here is get rid of these and add in a vertical object here for both of these to exist. And a vertical object or a horizontal object, any object, basically is a safe space or a partitioned area. So if I add additional views, it's not going to affect what happened in this vertical object down here. It's totally isolated. So in this case, I'm going to add the map to the object, and I'll add the time series. Now we just see the different views. The last step here is to hide the titles, so we're maximizing the real estate used. Now you can very easily toggle between two. If I use this as a filter, still works for both of these. Nothing is lost there in terms of filtering or interactivity, Tableau functionality. It's just hiding one or the other. So that about wraps up the presentation. If anybody has any additional questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat box. If not, I can easily send over this workbook as well.
And one thing I want to mention is, Dan, can you hear me? Just to make sure.
Yep. Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, cool. Just to make sure everybody knows, these are some of the advanced charts that Dan was showing, but this only scratches the surface. So there's hundreds of other different chart types out there. It all comes down to using your imagination. It's almost like you have a blank canvas like an artist. You can build just about anything you can imagine. It's just how you go about doing that. So another recommendation I have when it comes to advanced chart types is use Tableau Public. Find something that you like, find something that looks cool to you, and see how they made it. Download the workbook, download the data. So, just continue to think outside the box.
Yeah, exactly. Like Mike said, I mean, these were advanced chart types, but they're truly scratching the surface. If we go to Gallery in Tableau Public, I mean, these are just beautiful, beautiful dashboards. And people are doing crazy things with Tableau, like planets, for example. I haven't seen this one, but I mean, this is crazy. I have no idea what the calculations and stuff were behind this, but you can do things like this in Tableau if you use it enough.
Dan, will you pull up some of the sports ones that William has built, Watkins?
Yeah, definitely. So William is actually a product consultant that works 2 feet away from me, and he makes really crazy stuff. So let's see, William Watkins.
And what he's about to show, this comes back to, something that Dan and I have talked about is find data that you care about. Find something that you're passionate about, and as you're developing visualizations or content, you're just going to be more into it. So find a data set. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be small. Just find something that's interesting to you that you are passionate about would be a suggestion that I have as well.
So for example, I mean, what I showed you guys earlier, the bump chart, this thing, right, where we can toggle between the different dimensions and see what rank they are. This is also a bump chart, same exact thing, except it's 10 times cooler, and it shows you something related to MLS standings. Right, it's formatted well. You can see how the Red Bulls were performing over time. He's got a ton of other bump charts, conference standings. This is the type of stuff that really inspires people to use Tableau, is things like this. It's just super, super cool.
I agree. Well, I'm not seeing any questions to my end in the Q&A or the public chat. Dan, did you have anything directly to you?
I did not. Nope.
All right, cool. I think we can call it then. Guys, I will be converting this recording later this afternoon. It'll probably be tomorrow, just due to me being on the road today. So I will get this recorded and sent up there as soon as possible out for you guys. So Dan, I just want to thank you again so much for your time today and helping out with the presentation. There was some really awesome stuff, so I hope everybody found some fun value today, and hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday.